Papers scatter across the floor as I slam the drawers shut, fury spilling through me. 40 years of devotion, and he had been hiding this secret the entire time. I fall to my knees, hands trembling, gathering the mess of envelopes, receipts, and fading photographs. The air in the room feels thick, almost suffocating, as if the walls themselves are holding in the betrayal. My mind races and stalls at the same time, unable to process what I've discovered. Serafina Delacroix. The name burns into my memory, etched in fire across my heart. I trace the letters with a finger, hoping the reality will soften, but it only grows sharper, more excruciating. Every number in that bank account, every deposit, every transfer. Each one a silent act of betrayal that has stretched across decades. I remember the nights I stayed awake, worrying over his comfort, checking on him when he was ill, and putting his needs before my own. I recall every sacrifice I made without complaint. Skipped dinners with friends, abandoned hobbies, deferred dreams, all for him. And now, confronted with this cold proof, I feel like a fool who played her part in a drama she never truly understood. The betrayal cuts so deep that I taste it on my tongue, bitter and metallic, mingling with the rage coursing through my veins. I pace across the room, shoving aside chairs, bumping into tables, barely noticing. The sound of my own boots against the floorboards feels like a drumbeat of fury. Every corner of the house, every familiar object, suddenly feels tainted, as though this life I thought I knew has been stripped from me and replaced with a stranger's fiction. I can almost hear the echo of the lies. Late-night phone calls, whispered excuses, empty reassurances. He built a second life in the shadows, confident I would never find it. How dare he? How dare he betray me so completely, so methodically, without a single misstep? I sink back into the chair, clutching the papers, and allow myself a moment to tremble. Tears of fury burn my eyes, but it's not grief that overwhelms me, it's indignation. How could the man I loved, the man I trusted with my whole existence, live a lie that spanned decades? I replay every memory, every shared laugh, every whispered secret, wondering which parts were real and which were carefully staged for my benefit. The thought makes my stomach twist, a mixture of nausea and rage. I am both broken and incensed. I glance again at the account. My hands shake as I memorize the numbers, the dates, the steady pattern of transfers. He thought he could get away with it, thought he could hide a lifetime of lies behind polite smiles and feigned tenderness. 40 years. And I never saw it coming. I feel the betrayal as a physical weight pressing down on me, crushing the air from my lungs. And yet, beneath the suffocating despair, a spark ignites, a determination I didn't know I still possessed. I will not let him walk away from this. Not emotionally, not morally, not spiritually. He may never know the full extent of my plans, but I will see justice done. It is not vengeance I seek, though I admit the thought thrills me. It is balance, it is truth, it is reclaiming the life he tried to steal. I will sift through every scrap of evidence, every hidden document, every whisper of his deception, until the puzzle is complete and his duplicity cannot stand unchallenged. The room feels smaller, the walls closing in, but I do not care. I stand pacing again, letting the fury drive me. My fists clench so tightly I feel my nails press into my palms. I laugh bitterly, a sound devoid of joy, a raw, ragged sound that echoes in the empty house. 40 years of love, of patience, of trust, and all of it rests in the palm of a man who thought he could control it, manipulate it, and discard it at his whim. And now, for the first time in decades, I feel the power shift. I may have been deceived, but I am not defeated. Every moment of rage, every pang of heartbreak, every realization of his audacity fuels the fire inside me. I will reclaim what he took from me, my dignity, my agency, my life. He may have thought he was untouchable, but he underestimated the force of a woman scorned, a woman who has lived through 40 years of devotion only to discover that she was not alone in her love, and yet still has everything she needs to make it right. I sit for a moment, breathing heavily, letting the storm of emotions pass through me. And in the silence I vow silently, clearly, without hesitation. He will pay for this, even if he never knows it. If you discovered a secret your spouse had been keeping for decades, how would you react? Would you confront them immediately? Or take time to plan your response? Memories flood in like a tide I can't hold back. The unexplained phone calls, hushed conversations that ended abruptly whenever I entered the room. The drawers he kept locked, insisting they held nothing but important documents I should never touch. The business trips he said were urgent, necessary, unavoidable, trips he never bothered to explain, trips I assumed were just the way life worked. I replay these moments again and again, examining them with a clarity I didn't have at the time. Each one now feels like a red flag I chose to ignore. A whisper of deceit I convinced myself was nothing. I remember the nights I stayed awake, pacing the floor as I worried about him, checking his health, his comfort, his safety. I remember preparing his favorite meals, making sure the house smelled welcoming when he returned. I recall postponing my own plans, abandoning hobbies that had once given me joy, skipping visits with friends because he wanted me at home. Even trips I had dreamed of taking for years were canceled, delayed, or never mentioned because his needs came first. I convinced myself it was love, that this is what devotion required. I told myself that these sacrifices were noble, that he would return the favor in kind. And yet, all of that, every single compromise I made, feels wasted now. Anger coils around my chest, squeezing until I can barely breathe. Grief creeps in behind it, a slow, aching reminder of everything I've lost. Not just time but trust, joy, and the belief that the life we shared was real. How could I have been so blind? How could I have failed to notice the signs that were there all along? I see them now as clearly as if they were written in bold letters. The way he would glance at his phone and hide it when I walked into the room. The sighs he tried to mask when I asked questions about his day. The sudden urgency in his voice whenever I suggested a plan or brought up something that might interfere with his schedule. The carefully choreographed excuses, the small half-truths, the little lies that felt inconsequential at the time but were pieces of a far larger puzzle. And I blame myself. Even now, in the swirl of rage and heartbreak, a part of me wonders how I allowed this to happen. How I convinced myself that his secrecy was normal, that his evasions were harmless. How I trusted so fully, so completely, that I ignored the flickers of doubt in my mind. My devotion became a kind of blindness, a willingness to see only what I wanted to see, to preserve the illusion of our life together. I feel the tightness in my chest growing, a fire of fury mingling with the sorrow that wells up in my eyes. My hands tremble as I sit and gather the scattered memories in my mind, turning each one over like fragile glass, examining it from every angle. The late-night whispers, the canceled plans, the sudden absences, the evasive glances. They all converge into a tapestry of deceit so vast it takes my breath away. For decades he built a life I was excluded from, and I had danced willingly around the shadows, blind to what was happening right under my nose. But even as anger burns through me, clarity begins to take root. The signs I ignored, the mistakes I made by trusting too readily, will no longer hold me hostage. They will guide me. They will show me the path forward. Each memory is a clue, a thread leading me closer to the truth, to understanding, to justice. I begin to feel a determination rising through the grief and fury, a sense of power that comes from knowing the full scope of what I have endured. I realize now that love can be dangerous when misplaced, when it blinds you to reality. I gave him everything and he repaid me with deception, but I will not allow that to define me. My awareness of the signs, my understanding of how I was manipulated, becomes a weapon. I will use it to reclaim the life that was stolen, to expose the truths he tried to hide, and to ensure that his carefully constructed world crumbles in the face of my persistence. Even as I sit with these memories, letting the fire of betrayal and the ache of lost years mix together, I begin to plan. Slowly, methodically, I consider my next moves, the steps I must take to uncover every secret, to confront every deception, to reclaim what is mine. The anger no longer just burns. It sharpens, focusing my mind with the precision of a blade. I will not remain a passive victim. I will take action. Have you ever realized signs were there all along but ignored them out of love? If you had the chance to see them again, would you act differently? I drove to Frank's office with the papers clutched tightly in my lap, my knuckles white from the tension. The street seemed quieter than usual, the kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy and expectant. Each red light I stopped at felt like an eternity, a moment to rehearse the fury and disbelief I was carrying. I had spent hours rereading the documents, memorizing dates, amounts, and account numbers, but now that I was on my way to confront someone who could make sense of it all, my stomach twisted with a mixture of anticipation and dread. When I stepped into Frank's office, the familiar scent of old books and polished wood greeted me, but I barely noticed. My mind was elsewhere, focused entirely on the mission that had brought me here, to unravel the decades of deception my husband had built piece by piece. Frank looked up from his desk, brow furrowed. "Eleanor," he said cautiously. "What's going on?" I placed the papers on his desk, spreading them out so that each envelope and document could be seen clearly. The sight of them seemed to steal the air from the room. "Look at this," I said, my voice tight, trembling with barely controlled fury. Every single thing he hid from me. Every account, every property, every secret transaction. He has been living a life I never knew existed. Frank leaned forward, carefully examining the documents, flipping through receipts, letters, and bank statements. I watched his face closely, noting every flicker of emotion, every subtle sign that he understood the weight of what I had uncovered. "Eleanor, this is serious," he said slowly. "These are not minor financial secrets. This is a full life hidden from you. Assets, transfers, legal entities, even properties under different names." I felt my hands tighten into fists again. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. It wasn't just emotional betrayal. It was a calculated deception, spanning decades. He had not only cheated my heart, he had manipulated my life, my security, my very existence. 40 years of devotion, and the man I had trusted most in the world had used that trust as a weapon against me. As Frank continued sorting through the documents, I began recounting moments I had dismissed in the past. The sudden transfers of money, unexplained withdrawals, letters that didn't make sense, properties I thought we co-owned, but that were registered under different names. Each revelation added a new layer of shock and betrayal. I felt my chest tighten, my breath coming in shallow bursts. I had given everything for this marriage, my dreams, my freedom, my very life. And now I realized just how carefully he had orchestrated a secret existence while I played my part perfectly. Frank looked up, his eyes serious. "Eleanor, it's not just betrayal. This is legally significant. There are hidden assets, accounts, and properties. We may be able to reclaim some of it, but it will take careful planning. You need to proceed strategically." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. My anger burned, but now it was focused. I felt a strange sense of power in this knowledge. The same fury that had shaken me into action now sharpened my mind. This wasn't just heartbreak. It was a puzzle. A map of deception I intended to follow to its end. I would find every secret, confront every lie, and reclaim what was rightfully mine. Frank placed a hand gently on the stack of papers. "You're not just angry, you're determined. That will make all the difference. But be careful. Uncovering decades of deceit is dangerous, emotionally and legally. You have to think several steps ahead." I took a deep breath, letting the words sink in. I wasn't just thinking about revenge, I was thinking about justice, clarity, and finally control over the life that had been stolen from me. I realized that anger alone would not suffice. I needed strategy, patience, and unwavering focus. Every late night he spent deceiving me, every whispered lie, every hidden account, it had brought me to this moment, and I would use it. I left Frank's office feeling a mixture of fear and exhilaration. The city outside seemed unchanged, oblivious to the storm I carried within me. But I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Not my life, not my sense of self, not my understanding of the man I had loved. The papers, the accounts, the hidden properties, they were more than evidence. They were a call to action, a map to the truth, a spark that would ignite the fire of reckoning I had been waiting for. If you discovered decades of deception, would you confront it immediately? Or would you seek advice and plan your steps carefully? How far would you go to reclaim your life? I didn't sleep that night. I sat by the window, the papers spread across the kitchen table like a map of betrayal, the glow of the streetlights casting long, trembling shadows across the walls. My mind raced, replaying every piece of evidence Frank had examined with me earlier. Names, addresses, transactions, breadcrumbs leading to a life I had never imagined, yet now felt almost tangible. Among them, one stood out, Serafina Delacroix. She was the woman whose existence had been carefully hidden for decades, the name that haunted the ledger of deception. I needed to find her. I had to know who she was, what role she had played in the years of lies, and how deep this betrayal truly ran. The morning light was gray and heavy when I set out. My car hummed softly as I drove, my hands gripping the wheel tighter than necessary. I replayed every phone call, every sudden disappearance, every odd exchange of letters in my mind. Could she have known? Was she as much a victim as I was, or was she complicit in his lies? The questions churned in me, each one a sharp stone sinking into my chest. I arrived at the address I had pieced together from the documents. The house was modest, unassuming, tucked behind overgrown hedges that shielded it from view. There was nothing ostentatious about it, nothing that suggested the elaborate web of secrecy that had been built around it. I sat in my car, heart hammering, staring at the door as if looking too long would make her disappear. The very thought of confronting her filled me with a mix of fear, rage, and morbid curiosity. Every instinct screamed caution, but the fire inside me would not allow hesitation. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching under my shoes, a sound so sharp it seemed to echo in the still morning air. Each step toward the door was deliberate, measured, heavy with anticipation. My hand hovered over the doorbell for a long moment, and I could feel the heat of my own anger radiating through my chest. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about uncovering the truth, about confronting the woman who had unknowingly shared the life he stole from me. I rang the bell, each chime a pulse in my ears. The door opened slowly and she appeared. She was younger than I had imagined, her eyes wide with surprise, her lips parting in shock. There was innocence there, yes, but also a hint of something I could not yet name. Fear, perhaps, or the recognition of being caught in a truth she had never expected to confront. We stood there in silence, the air thick with tension, as I measured her reaction. I could feel my pulse in my throat, the thrum of anger and anticipation driving me forward. And then, finally, words escaped me. "Serafina, we need to talk." My voice was low, controlled, but carried the weight of 40 years of betrayal. She stepped back slightly, as if giving herself room to breathe, and I took that as my opening. The questions tumbled from my mind, each one more urgent than the last. Who knew what? When did she find out? How long had she believed he was single, widowed, or honest? Was she another victim? Or had she willingly stepped into his lies? Each query burned in me, a dagger I could not sheath until I had answers. She invited me in cautiously, and I followed, my senses alert to every sound, every movement. The house was neat, tidy, unassuming. The kind of place that could hide a lifetime of secrets without a single whisper. As we sat, I studied her face, searching for truth in her eyes, searching for any hint that she had knowingly played a part in his deception. But her eyes told only one story. Confusion, shock, and a dawning realization that the world I had uncovered was far more complex than either of us had imagined. In that quiet living room, I realized the enormity of what I was facing. It wasn't just betrayal between a husband and a wife. It was a network of deception spanning decades, affecting not just me, but everyone tied to him, unknowingly or otherwise. And yet, beneath the anger and disbelief, I felt a spark of clarity. I wasn't powerless. I had the truth and with it the ability to navigate this labyrinth of lies. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Serafina," I said again, my voice softer this time, yet still carrying the weight of my years. "I don't know how much you realize, but he has been hiding everything from both of us. And now I need to understand everything you know." Her eyes widened and she nodded slowly. I didn't know," she whispered. I thought he was alone. I never imagined this." Her words confirmed what I suspected. She was another victim, and yet, in a strange, bitter way, she was also a mirror of the life I had been denied. The realization stung, but it also focused me. This wasn't about destroying her. It was about uncovering the truth and reclaiming what had been stolen. If you discovered someone had unknowingly shared in your spouse's deception, would you see them as an ally, a rival, or simply another victim? How would you approach the first conversation? The moment I stepped fully into her living room, I felt a strange combination of rage, curiosity, and grim determination. Every step I had taken to get here, every sleepless night, every trembling heartbeat, had led to this confrontation. She was standing there, hands pressed lightly together, eyes wide with the kind of fear I knew all too well, the fear of a secret being uncovered, of a life unraveling at the edges. And yet, I could see the vulnerability behind her gaze, a reflection of my own shock when I first uncovered his hidden life. "Serafina," I began, my voice low but steady, carrying 40 years of betrayal in every syllable. "We need to talk about him." About everything. My words hung in the air, sharp and deliberate, cutting through the tense silence that seemed to hold the room hostage. She flinched slightly, and I almost felt a flicker of pity. Almost. I don't understand, she whispered, her hands trembling. I thought he was alone. I never imagined. Her voice trailed off, faltering under the weight of what she realized in that instant. I stepped closer, feeling the fire of anger pulse in my chest. You need to understand, I said slowly, letting each word hit with deliberate force. He has been living a double life. Every word he ever said, every promise he ever made. Some of it was true, some of it was a lie, and some of it, most of it, was meant to keep both of us in the dark. Her eyes widened further, the confusion and fear in them making my own anger feel hotter. She had been blind too, yes, but unlike me, she had not sacrificed decades of her life. Unlike me, she had not built her world around a man who had betrayed her in the most intimate way possible. And yet there was a strange bond forming in that shared shock. Two women, both deceived, facing the same impossible truth. Why? I demanded, the word barely a whisper but filled with the weight of 40 years. Why would he do this to both of us? Why hide his life from me, from you? She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. I don't know, she admitted, voice breaking. I truly thought he loved me. I thought he was alone like I was. I had no idea he had a wife, let alone for decades. I never imagined. I felt a jolt of conflicting emotions. Fury, sorrow, and a reluctant empathy. She was a mirror of what I could have been if our roles were reversed. Yet she was also living a part of the life that should have been mine. My chest tightened, and for a moment, I wasn't sure whether to strike out with anger or extend a cautious hand of understanding. But then reality hit me. It wasn't about understanding. It was about truth. We need to go through everything, I said, my voice firm, resolute. Every document, every account, every hidden transaction. I need to know exactly what he's done, and I need you to be honest. No more lies. No more secrets. Not anymore. She nodded slowly, the shock in her eyes mingling with the first glimmer of trust. Yes, I understand. I'll tell you everything I know. I want to know too. I need to know the truth. As we sat together unfolding letters and comparing notes, a strange sense of alliance began to form. This confrontation, tense and volatile as it was, had created something neither of us expected. A shared understanding, a bond forged in betrayal. And yet, beneath it all, I felt the simmering fire of justice. We had both been wronged, and now it was time to take control, to uncover every hidden piece of the puzzle he had constructed over decades. Her presence made the room feel smaller, almost suffocating with the weight of secrets yet to be revealed. I could see the trembling in her hands, the quiver in her lips, the way her eyes darted to each document with fear and disbelief. And I realized in that moment that while we were both victims, I had the added burden, and the added power of turning anger into action. I leaned back slightly, letting the tension settle for a heartbeat. We can't undo the past, I said quietly, my voice steadier now. But we can make sure the future doesn't belong to him. We can take back what he stole, and we can ensure he doesn't get away with this. Not now, not ever. She nodded, swallowing hard, and I could see the understanding in her eyes. The shared shock, the mutual betrayal, and the dawning awareness of what lay ahead created a bond one hadn't anticipated. Two women wronged by the same man, now poised on the edge of discovery, revenge, and justice. If you discovered someone had unknowingly shared in your spouse's deception, would you see them as a potential ally, a rival, or simply another victim? How would you approach the first confrontation? Even after hours of comparing documents with Serafina, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more. A gnawing suspicion had taken root in my mind, persistent and insistent. Something was missing, something carefully concealed. A final piece of the puzzle that would explain the full extent of his deception. I couldn't rest, not yet. It was then, while we were sifting through another stack of papers, that I remembered the drawer. A small, unassuming drawer in our bedroom dresser, the one I had always been told contained old papers. He had insisted I never look inside it. At the time, I obeyed without question. Now, I cursed myself for that blind compliance. 40 years of trust had been weaponized against me, and I had allowed it. I excused myself, moving toward our old home with the sense of purpose that had taken root in me over the last few days. The air was heavy with anticipation, the kind that makes your stomach churn and your palms sweat. Every step felt measured, deliberate, and yet my mind raced ahead of my body, imagining what I might find inside that drawer. Money, documents, proof of even darker lies? The possibilities were endless, each more infuriating than the last. When I arrived, the house felt impossibly quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. I walked to the dresser, heart hammering, hands trembling. The drawer looked innocent enough, ordinary wood, brass handle worn smooth with age. But I knew better. I had learned to read the subtleties of deception. The slight unevenness in the drawer's alignment, the faint scratch marks near the lock. It all told a story of careful concealment. I knelt before it, inhaling sharply, and pulled. At first, it resisted slightly, as if guarding its secrets. Then with a final tug it slid open, revealing its contents. And there it was, a folder labeled Delacroix, Confidential. My hand shook as I lifted it, as though touching it would somehow awaken decades of lies. Inside were letters, photographs, and more documents, a carefully compiled archive of his hidden life. I flipped through the letters, each one a dagger twisting into my chest. They were written in his precise hand, detailing financial transfers, meetings, and plans that had never touched my awareness. There were photographs of him with Serafina at places and events I had been kept from, smiles frozen in time that mocked me silently. Every page confirmed what I already suspected. He had lived a parallel existence, meticulously documented, and I had been blind to it. I felt a surge of fury so intense it made my vision blur. 40 years of devotion, of unquestioning trust, of sacrifices I had made willingly, and it had all been for a man who had never truly shared his life with me. Rage and grief collided inside me, hot and suffocating, yet beneath it, a steely determination began to form. This was more than betrayal, this was an invitation. He had left me the map of his deceit, whether intentionally or not, and now it was my turn to use it. I carefully organized the documents, making mental notes of the most critical pieces of evidence. Dates, amounts, signatures, everything could be used, every detail mattered. The drawer had been his final attempt at secrecy, yet it became my greatest weapon. In that moment I realized that I was no longer the passive victim I had been for decades. I was now an architect of justice, poised to dismantle the life he had built on lies. As I closed the drawer, my heart still pounding, I knew that this discovery would change everything. The hidden folder wasn't just a revelation of betrayal. It was a key to understanding the full scope of his deception, and a tool I could use to reclaim what had been stolen. I felt the fire inside me flare brighter, sharpened by clarity and purpose. If you found a hidden folder containing decades of lies and secrets, would you confront the person immediately, or take time to plan your next move? How far would you go to uncover the truth? The hidden drawer had given me clarity, but it also brought a chilling realization. Knowing the truth was only the beginning. Acting on it would require patience, strategy, and precision. I sat at my kitchen table late into the night, the folder spread before me like a battlefield map. Each document, photograph, and handwritten note was a piece of a puzzle that, when assembled, would reveal the full scope of his betrayal. My fingers traced the edges of the papers, each one a reminder of the life he had stolen from me. I began by organizing the information meticulously. Bank accounts, properties, hidden investments, transfers disguised as business expenses. It was staggering how much he had hidden, how carefully he had manipulated the numbers and names. His arrogance astounded me. He had believed he could build a secret life and leave no trace, but in his meticulousness, he had left breadcrumbs that now guided me to the truth. I opened a notebook and began mapping out timelines. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every suspicious activity had a place on the page. I drew lines connecting accounts, notes about dates, hints from letters, and even subtle patterns in the photographs of him with Serafina. It was like following a trail of fire through a dark forest. Each mark led to another, each clue revealing more of the hidden landscape he had built. Hours passed, yet I couldn't stop. The more I studied, the more I remembered. Conversations that didn't add up, business trips that had never been explained, nights he returned home smelling of perfume that wasn't mine, glances that lingered too long at his phone. How had I ignored these signs for so long? How had I allowed myself to be blind for 40 years? And then I realized that anger, that pain would now become my fuel. I would channel it, not recklessly, but with the precision of a surgeon. I also considered Serafina. She had been unknowingly drawn into his web, a piece of the puzzle I could not ignore. Her cooperation would be crucial. If I could gain her trust, her knowledge could help me uncover even more hidden secrets. But I had to be careful. I couldn't allow resentment or fear to fracture the fragile alliance that might form between us. I had to navigate carefully, ensuring that we remained on the same side, united by the truth rather than divided by emotion. As the night deepened, I began drafting scenarios in my mind, each one more intricate than the last. What if he denied everything? What if he tried to manipulate me, to turn the evidence against me? How would I respond? I imagined every possible objection, every denial, every attempt at gaslighting, and wrote down counterpoints, strategies, and contingencies. I was building an arsenal and every detail mattered. I pictured the confrontation itself in vivid detail. The moment he would realize I knew everything, the shock in his eyes, the disbelief, the panic he would try to mask with charm or arrogance. I imagined myself standing firm, my voice steady, every word measured and deliberate, every revelation hitting with the weight of undeniable proof. I would not flinch, I would not hesitate, and I would not allow him to rewrite history with lies or manipulation. I even thought about small details, the timing, the setting, who should be present. Would it be better in the quiet of our home, where every corner held memories of the life he had twisted, or in a neutral place, where I could control the narrative and minimize his ability to intimidate me? Every choice mattered, and I spent hours weighing the pros and cons, scribbling notes, and mentally rehearsing every exchange. By midnight, my mind was a whirlwind of strategy and emotion. Yet in that chaos, a strange clarity emerged. I was no longer a passive victim of decades of deception. I had the truth, and I had the power to act. Each lie he had told, each secret he had hidden, had prepared me for this moment. 40 years of love, trust, and sacrifice had forged a resilience and determination that he could never anticipate. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but resolute. I lit a candle, its flickering flame casting long shadows across the papers and the walls. The shadows reminded me of the darkness he had hidden in, the shadows where his lies had festered, safe from scrutiny. And now the same shadows would witness his reckoning. I would bring light to every corner of his deceit, and he would have nowhere left to hide. Finally, I allowed myself a small, grim smile. The confrontation was coming, inevitable and unavoidable. And when it happened, I would be ready. Not just ready to accuse, not just ready to yell or demand answers, but ready to dismantle the life he had carefully constructed from lies, brick by brick, with truth as my weapon and years of betrayal fueling my precision. If you had decades of hidden betrayal against you, would you plan meticulously like Eleanor or confront the person immediately? What steps would you take to ensure the truth could not be denied? I waited until the evening, letting the sun sink low behind the trees, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gray. The house was quiet, every creak and whisper amplified in the stillness. I had rehearsed this confrontation in my mind for days, hours of imagining the exact words, the timing, the expression on his face. Nothing could have fully prepared me for the weight of the moment, but I was ready. I had the papers, the evidence, and a fury that had been building for decades. I found him in the study, as usual, pretending to be absorbed in his papers. The casualness in his posture made my blood boil, as if nothing had changed, as if 40 years of trust, of devotion, of life itself, had not been shattered by his hidden life. I stepped into the room, the weight of the folder pressing against my chest, my heartbeat loud in my ears. "Thad," I said, my voice low, calm but edged with steel. He looked up slowly, a faint smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Eleanor, is everything okay?" His tone was casual, deceptively so, but I could see the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. I held up the folder. "We need to talk. About everything." His smile faltered just slightly, but enough to send a thrill through me. He thought he could charm me into silence. He thought he could deflect. But the years had forged me into someone who would no longer be manipulated. I placed the folder on his desk, opening it so he could see the first documents, the letters, the photographs, the hidden bank statements, all meticulously laid out. His eyes widened slightly, a flash of panic crossing his features, quickly masked by his habitual composure. "Eleanor, what is this?" he asked, his voice too calm, too careful. I let a beat pass, letting the tension hang thick in the room. "Do you really want me to explain, Thad?" I said softly, almost conversationally, but the words carried the weight of 40 years of deception. "Do you want me to tell you that I know about Serafina? About the hidden accounts? About every property, every transaction, every lie you've told to keep your life hidden from me?" He swallowed hard, a tell I had learned to notice over decades. "Eleanor." I cut him off, my voice rising, the fury spilling out in a controlled torrent. Do not dare speak. 40 years, Thad. 40 years I trusted you. 40 years I bent my life around you. 40 years I sacrificed, waited, and believed in us. And you hid this." I slammed my hand on the desk, the papers rattling. The sound was loud, final, a punctuation mark on decades of betrayal. He rose slowly, hands raised, but there was no charm left in his gestures. Panic now replaced arrogance. I didn't think it would ever come to this," he said, voice trembling slightly. I can explain." I laughed, a harsh, bitter laugh, fueled by years of grief and rage. "Explain? You think words can undo this? You think excuses can erase decades of lies? You've stolen my life, Thad. My trust. My love. Every choice I made for us, every dream I deferred, every sacrifice gone. And now, you stand here expecting me to listen to explanations." His eyes darted to the folder, realizing perhaps for the first time that the evidence was undeniable. I could see him calculating, thinking of ways to manipulate, to charm, to deflect, but it was too late. The power had shifted. I leaned forward, voice low, deliberate, each word sharp and precise. "Do you see these papers? These are not just numbers, Thad. These are proof. Proof that you lived a life parallel to mine. A life of deceit and manipulation. A life built on lies that you thought I would never uncover. And now I hold the power." He flinched just slightly, but enough. "Eleanor." I slammed my hand again on the desk, the sound echoing in the room. "No. I will not let you speak until you have faced what you have done. Look at them. Look at the photographs of you with Serafina, smiling, laughing, pretending life was just simple and innocent. Look at the accounts, the properties, the evidence of your duplicity. You thought you could hide it, but every detail, every secret has been uncovered. Every lie is exposed." The panic in his eyes now was unmistakable. He stumbled back, looking for words, for an escape, for something, anything to regain control. But I had already claimed it. I had studied, planned, and waited. He could not manipulate the facts. They were undeniable. I let the silence stretch, letting him feel the full weight of my presence. The decades of betrayal I had carried alone. The fury that had been simmering, ready to erupt. And then I spoke again, quieter now, but still sharp, still powerful. "Do you understand what you've done? Do you realize what it means to betray someone for 40 years, to construct a life of lies, to hide everything from the person who trusted you most?" He shook his head, eyes wide, the mask of arrogance gone. I didn't think." "You didn't think," I interrupted, voice steady, cutting like a blade. "You didn't think about me, about my life, about the trust, the love, the devotion that I gave you willingly, fully, without hesitation. You didn't think I would uncover the truth, that I would find the documents, the hidden accounts, the letters, the photographs. But I did. And now you will face the consequences of every deception, every secret, every lie." He sank into the chair, defeated, the fight draining from him. And I realized in that moment that this confrontation was more than a release of fury. It was a reclamation. I was no longer the woman who had blindly trusted, who had bent her life around his whims. I was Eleanor, informed, prepared, determined, and finally in control. I slid the folder closer, letting him see the evidence once more. "This is your life laid bare," I said, voice calm but heavy with authority. "And this is the end of the secrets. From this moment on, every lie, every hidden truth will be accounted for. And I will not rest until the balance has been restored." He looked up at me, eyes haunted now, recognizing finally that the woman in front of him, the woman he had underestimated for decades, was unshakable, unstoppable, and fully aware. The power dynamic had shifted irrevocably. I stood, taking a deep breath, letting the silence stretch as I savored the first taste of justice. The confrontation was not just about anger. It was about truth, about reclaiming my life, about taking back the years he had stolen. I had waited 40 years for this moment, and now it has arrived. If you finally confronted someone who had deceived you for decades, how would you ensure they truly understand the consequences? Would you rely on evidence, emotions, or both? The confrontation left the house eerily silent. Even though Thad had slumped into his chair, defeated and exposed, the tension didn't dissipate. Instead, it lingered like smoke, thick and choking, curling around every corner, every shadow. I stood for a long moment, breathing heavily, my hands trembling from the intensity of the encounter. 40 years of betrayal had been unearthed in a single evening, yet the weight of it pressed on me like a physical force. I walked slowly to the window, staring out at the fading light. The neighborhood was calm, oblivious to the storm that had erupted behind these walls. It struck me how ordinary everything looked, how normal life continued outside, while mine had been irrevocably altered. For decades I had lived in a carefully curated reality, built on trust and love, only to discover it was nothing but a fragile illusion. And now, even though I had confronted him, even though the lies were laid bare, I could not immediately shake the lingering sense of disorientation, of displacement. Serafina's words echoed in my mind, the uneasy alliance we had formed earlier now feeling even more significant. She was innocent in all of this, yet her life had intersected with his deceit in ways neither of us could ignore. I realized that while the confrontation had been necessary, it was only the first step in a far longer journey, one that would involve navigating the tangled web of his lies, reclaiming what had been stolen, and confronting the emotional fallout that inevitably followed. I returned to the folder, now resting on the dining table like a monument to betrayal. Each page, each document, each photograph was a reminder of what he had done, what he had hidden, and what I had uncovered. I began to sort them again, carefully cataloging everything for the steps ahead. This was no longer about anger alone. It was about preparation, strategy, and reclaiming control over the life that had been stolen from me. Thad remained silent, slouched in his chair, eyes downcast. I could sense the weight of his own realization pressing down on him, the slow dawning of accountability. But even in his silence, I could not afford to relax. Decades of deception had taught me that the truth could be twisted, manipulated, or ignored if the one who had caused it refused to fully acknowledge it. I had to remain vigilant, focused, and clear-headed. I poured myself a cup of tea, letting the warmth soothe my nerves while my mind continued to race. Every scenario I had imagined during the planning stage now played out in real time in my head. Every reaction of his, every subtle sign of fear, every flicker of guilt or shame. I could see how carefully he had tried to maintain composure, how practiced he was at hiding the cracks, but now those cracks were wide open, exposing him fully to the truth and to me. Hours passed, the room darkening as the candlelight flickered and danced across the walls. I reflected on the journey that had led me here. The small suspicions I had ignored, the sacrifices I had made, the late nights of worry and doubt, the mounting sense of unease that had never truly left me. Each memory, each emotion, now seemed like a prelude, a necessary step that had prepared me for this confrontation. And yet, even with all the clarity I now possessed, I could not ignore the emotional toll. The sense of betrayal was raw and deep, cutting through every layer of composure I had tried to maintain. I moved to the hallway, looking at the photographs that lined the walls. Family pictures, happy smiles frozen in time. All now tainted by the knowledge that a shadow had lingered over those moments, a deception that had been present in every laugh, every embrace, every celebration. I felt a mixture of grief, fury, and resolve. The life I had known was gone, yet the path forward had never been clearer. Serafina called that evening, her voice trembling but steady. "Eleanor, I've been thinking. We need to coordinate. There's more he's hidden, more we need to uncover. And we need to be careful. He'll try to protect himself." Her words confirmed my suspicions. This was far from over. The confrontation had been only a single battle. The war, it seemed, was just beginning. I nodded, listening intently, my mind already racing through the next steps. I realized that the aftermath of the confrontation would not just involve uncovering more secrets, but also reclaiming power, rebuilding trust in my own judgment, and deciding what to do with the years that had been stolen from me. There was anger, yes, but there was also a strange exhilaration, a recognition that I now held the reins, that the truth was mine to wield, and that the future, for the first time in decades, belonged to me. As the night deepened, I sat alone in the dim candlelight, the folder open in front of me. My mind replayed the confrontation over and over, analyzing every word, every gesture, every reaction. The adrenaline from earlier had subsided, replaced by a contemplative intensity. I realized that the aftermath of this confrontation was as much about preparation and strategy as it was about emotion. Every decision I would make from now on would be informed by what I had learned tonight, about him, about myself, and about the strength I had discovered within. And in that quiet, reflective hour, I understood something crucial. Revenge alone would not heal the wounds, nor would anger alone restore the years lost. It would be justice, precise, calculated, and unyielding, that would allow me to reclaim the life he had stolen. And I was ready. After confronting someone who has betrayed you for decades, how would you process the aftermath? Would you focus on planning, reflection, or taking immediate action to reclaim your life? The following days were a tense, quiet storm. Thad moved around the house like a shadow of his former self, cautious, calculating, yet visibly shaken. The confrontation had stripped him bare, exposing every lie, every secret he had carefully hoarded for decades. And I had watched him unravel, piece by piece, like a man who had finally realized the full consequences of his actions. Serafina and I worked tirelessly, going over every document, tracing every hidden account, and connecting every dot. She was no longer a stranger, no longer an accidental participant. She had become my ally, a reflection of the life that had been hidden from me, yet also a testament to how carefully our lives had been manipulated. Together we unearthed more than I could have imagined. Secret properties, financial transactions, letters of deceit, even plans that had threatened not just me, but everything we had built. I remember the moment we discovered the final piece. A set of letters detailing his most audacious lies, including schemes to profit from my trust and manipulate both our lives for personal gain. Holding those letters in my hands, I felt a mix of fury and liberation. 40 years of deception, now documented and undeniable. For the first time in decades, I felt the weight of justice begin to tip in my favor. When I confronted Thad with the final evidence, it was different this time. There was no room for charm, no chance for deflection, no hiding behind excuses. I laid out the documents meticulously, each one a strike in the reckoning he had long postponed. His face went pale, lips pressed tight, eyes darting between the evidence and me. "This," I said, voice low but unwavering, "is everything you tried to hide. Every lie, every secret, every betrayal. And now it ends here. You cannot deny the truth, and you cannot escape accountability." He stammered, reaching for words that would never come. I could see the fear in his eyes, the fear of exposure, the fear of loss, the fear of a life stripped of its carefully constructed illusions. But I did not hesitate. I had prepared, I had waited, and now I acted with clarity and purpose. The legal actions were swift and precise. Properties were reclaimed, accounts frozen, and hidden assets exposed. Every move I made was calculated, ensuring that the consequences were comprehensive and undeniable. I had turned the tools of his deceit against him, and in doing so, I reclaimed not just my life, but the years he had stolen. Yet, even as justice was served, there was an emotional reckoning within me. I spent nights alone, reflecting on what had been lost, on the grief of years spent in a carefully constructed illusion. I allowed myself to mourn, to feel the depth of betrayal, but I also allowed myself to feel something else: liberation. The chains of deception had been broken, and for the first time in decades, I could breathe freely, think clearly, and plan for a life of my own choosing. Serafina and I remained in contact, our bond forged in betrayal and tempered by truth. We had both been victims, yet together we had navigated the storm, emerged stronger, and reclaimed our power. I realized that this was more than revenge. It was reclamation, empowerment, and justice. Standing by the window that night, looking at the city lights flickering in the distance, I whispered to myself, "I am no longer the woman who was deceived. I am Eleanor, and my life is mine again." The weight of 40 years of betrayal had been lifted, replaced by clarity, purpose, and a hard-earned sense of freedom. And now I want to speak directly to you. Yes, you are listening. Life is too short to allow deceit, manipulation, or betrayal to define your story. If you've ever been wronged, if you've ever been deceived, if you've ever felt powerless, remember this. The truth is your weapon, your voice is your power, and the time to reclaim your life is now. Don't wait for justice to find you. Stand firm, gather the facts, confront the lies, and reclaim what is rightfully yours. Your story is yours to write. Don't let anyone else hold the pen. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever faced betrayal and fought to reclaim your life, comment below and share your own experience. Like this video to support stories of justice and empowerment, and subscribe now to follow more real-life tales of resilience, revenge, and triumph. Your voice matters, and your story deserves to be heard.